Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm Paige. I'm an addict, and what a privilege and a pleasure it is to be here with you guys today. And yeah, I was asked if I could share my experience, strength, and hope, but some of y'all know I like to do things a little weird. Now, I wasn't up all night trying to take care of a puppy, but I am a little overtired. Somebody was talking about that before the meeting. So it's going to be a weird one. So what we're going to do is I'm going to share my experience, strength, and hope as it pertains to a little bit of the spiritual botany, some spiritual gardening, and I'm going to talk about my experience with that. And as always, I'm going to come out of the book. So I'm going to bounce around the book, and if you don't have it to hand, don't worry. I'm going to read all the things, so you're not going to miss anything at all. But if you got your book to hand, grab a hold, let's dive in. So where we're going to kick off is on page 62. It says, and the first full paragraph, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. And I don't know about you, this was the first time I really felt that idea of like, I have been bamboozled. Like, what do you mean? You see, I came to the rooms at 12-step and I thought my problem was drugs, including alcohol. I thought that was my problem. You did a little bit of spiritual jujitsu on me, and you told me that my problem actually wasn't the drugs and the alcohol. My problem was that I could not stop myself from taking the drugs and the alcohol. And then now on page 62, you tell me that the root of my troubles is selfishness, self-centeredness. Wait, what a minute, what? So let's talk about this for a second. Let's talk about the symptoms of the illness that is addiction as it's defined in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. So the first symptom that I had a bit of an inkling by the time I got here was the allergy of the body. See, I don't know about you, but I take a mind-altering substance and there is something that happens to me. You guys can let me know if it happens to you. I pop this pill, I have this hoot of crack, I take a drink and I experience, yeah, I am okay. I can be okay in my own skin, and I'm putting a little placeholder. The placeholder that we're going to come back to is when I get loaded, what I am after is I am after relief. And I'll tell you, a drink works. A hoot of crack works. Popping the pills that I was popping, whether they were mine or yours, wherever I got them, they worked. It worked. And I experienced that sense of ease and comfort. And I experienced that release and that relief. And that's what I needed. Now, you see, the thing that happened to me is I would take that hoot, I would take that drink, I would pop that pill, and it was like a little switch that would go off in the back of my head, and it would tell me more. And the more that I drank and used, the more that I needed to drink and use. So you see, I don't know about you, that first hoot, that first drink, it demanded a second. And that second insisted on 4. And that fourth would not relent until I've had 8. And the 8th would tell me, man, you're not done until you get 16. And the more that I used, the more that I needed to use. And that was something that was reasonably intuitive to me. You see, I would burn my life to the ground. And I would scrape myself up off the bathroom floor. And that's actually me being classy. More often than not, I'd be behind a dumpster. But I would scrape myself up off the bathroom floor, pinkies up like a lady. And I would have this inkling that drugs and alcohol had something to do with the situation. You know what I mean? I wasn't brimming over with self-awareness, but I had an inkling here and there. You see, I would come to the morning after, fueled with that guilt and that shame and that remorse and that self-hatred and that self-pity, and I could not stand who I was. I could not stand how I was feeling. I couldn't look myself in the mirror. I hated myself. And that sprinkling of self-awareness was like, okay, I got to stop this. I'm done. I'm not going to use again. I'm done. And the thing was that I meant it. And this was the thing that was a little bit more tricky for somebody like me to grasp my mind around, was that I had this obsession of the mind. You see, this was the first time I got bamboozled. Well, actually, that's not true. The first time I got bamboozled is I didn't think I had a problem. I came to the rooms, and I'll tell you, it wasn't after a winning streak. Let me tell you that. But I came to the rooms, and I thought I showed up after an unfortunate series of oopsie doopsies and whoopsie daisies. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not an addict. It's just some bad luck. But I showed up to the rooms, and then you guys told me the symptoms of the illness that is addiction. Because I would show up with all these andas, all these yeah buts, all the ways that I'm different. And you would tell me, Paige, there's 2 symptoms you got to watch out for. The first is the allergy of the body. Once you start, you cannot stop. And I'm like, uh-oh, that's me. And I could see that. But here's where I really got bamboozled or hoodwinked or, I don't know. Like, here's where you did the bait and switch, because I thought the problem was the booze. I thought the problem was the drugs. And you told me no. Of course, we have the allergy of the body, and that means I cannot ever drink or use ever again. But Paige, if you have what I have, you also have the obsession of the mind. And the obsession of the mind is what is so confusing about this thing, because it happens when I am sober. And when I am as sober as I am today, but my illness is untreated, I will get a thought. And that thought will tell me this time will be different. Nobody will ever know. I just got to get it out of my system. You know, my problem was drinking with Canadians. It's chilly. We gotta keep warm somehow. You know, but we're in South Africa. It'll be different. I gotta cool off. Can't stand that heat. I hope there's a thunderstorm. You know what I'm saying? I'm just hoping it'll be different this time. So here's how. Or I know it's not gonna be different, but I don't care. And I just need a drink. I just need a hoot. I just need some relief. And I go back to it again and again and again. You see, what happened is I was experiencing the truth about who I was. And the truth about who I was as an addict is that there will never, ever be a time when I could ever safely use again because of the allergy of the body. But because of the obsession of the mind, I will use again. You see, I thought all I had to do was get sober. But sobriety is not a solution for addiction, because every time I took that first hoot, hit, pill, whatever, every time I relapsed, I was sober. So sobriety cannot be a solution. And I had what I like to describe as a step 1 experience. And that step 1 experience was that deep and powerful concession that I had to stay sober. I needed to stay sober. I wanted to stay sober. But it was only a matter of time. I would relapse. And that is my step 1 experience, that I am going to do it again. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen a lot quicker and a lot sooner than I think it is. And that's what we focus on, or at least that's what I focused on in my first step, to focus on what differentiates me from non-addicts, me from normal, non-addicted people. That I've got these 2 symptoms that makes me different. And I'll tell you that when I have that understanding that I absolutely cannot use again, but I'm going to use again, that relapse is inevitable and is imminent. When I have that at an experiential level, that opens me up to the idea that there could be a solution. And that's really what the second step is all about. But in the second step, we begin to talk about something that we don't really talk about in step 1. And in step 2, we spoke about, on page 52, these things that are known as the bedevilments. And it talks about how I can't make a living, a feeling of uselessness, a prey to misery and depression. I can't seem to be of real use to other people. I was unhappy, all of those symptoms, and those are the symptoms that I experience when I'm sober. And you see, what happens is I've got a spiritual malady. Now, we don't focus so much about it on step 1 because the spiritual malady is not limited to alcoholics and drug addicts. The spiritual malady is something that affects many human beings on earth. There are spiritually sick people. Whenever I go somewhere, I try to make jokes that are local. I'm like, if the All Blacks beat the Springboks, we would find some spiritually sick people. Sorry, when the Springboks beat the All Blacks, you'll find the spiritually sick people in New Zealand. Sorry. Don't mention that. You know what I'm saying, though? But we will find spiritually sick people who are not experiencing what I'm experiencing, which is the allergy of the body and the obsession of the mind. And so when I come to page 62 and it says selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles, I get that bait and switch again. What do you mean? What do you mean the root of my troubles is my selfishness and self-centeredness? And I'll tell you what my experience is. My experience is that spiritual malady, which is not diagnostic of the illness that is addiction, but it is what we treat in Cocaine Anonymous. It is the purpose of the 12 steps in the spiritual awakening to treat that spiritual malady. That is what I experience when I am sober. And that experience is a conscious sense of separateness from a power greater than myself. It is a conscious sense of separateness from God. That's what I'm experiencing. And that's what that pain is. And if you've ever heard of the expression, a canary in the coal mine, back in the day in like the 1800s and earlier, and mining today is still very dangerous, but in a coal mine, they would bring down these canaries, these birds. And what they would do is they would do what birds do, which is make noise and poop. And the poop thing is just me making an aside. Didn't need to say that. Sorry, everyone. But they would make noise and they would chirp and they would tweet. And when they would stop, it would indicate the miners that there was a gas leak and that something was wrong, that something was amiss. And I feel like, the gas leak, that conscious sense of separateness, that affects human beings. But there's something about somebody like me as an addict where I'm sensitive to it. And what I'm after is a solution for the way that I feel. And I turn to substances. And wouldn't you know it, the substances work. I get that ease, that comfort, that relief, that release, that everything that I was after. It works. And I don't know about you guys. I'm a relief-seeking missile. I'm after it. I need it. And it works so well that after a period of time, my mind begins to warp and it begins to tell me whatever lie it needs to tell me. So I go back to the only thing that ever gave me relief. And so what is fueling this obsession of the mind, which is my main problem? My main problem is that I go back to it even though I don't want to. What is fueling that is the spiritual malady. And so when it says selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Let's talk about that root. The root of my troubles is what is I'm talking about plants today. That's sort of the theme of this talk. Because I didn't get a lot of sleep and we get what we get. And it's okay to get upset. We can just write inventory on me. But that's the theme of this talk. And what is a root? A root is what feeds the plant. So what is feeding my troubles is selfishness, self-centeredness. Now, if you've ever hurt yourself, if you've ever been in physical pain, all you can think of is that pain. You know what I mean? You know when you stub your toe in the middle of the night? I haven't done that in a long time. But you stub your toe and it's like, that's all I can think of, right? And I operate, when I'm in physical pain, I operate from that place of physical pain. Well, it's the exact same thing with emotional pain. The conscious sense of separateness from this power, it leads me to experience these bedevilments. It leads me to experience the restless, irritable discontent that is spoken about in the doctor's opinion. I am in pain, and it is real. That pain is real, but I'm operating from pain. And to operate from pain is I am focused on me. I am centered on me, and I'll tell you, my self-centeredness doesn't look like I'm so great. Everybody loves me. Woo! Paige is here. No, it never has ever looked like that. My self-centeredness is I am the worst human being that has ever lived. Everyone hates me. Do you see what I mean? I am still centered upon self. And that self is grandiose, but not in this I am better than, but I am so much less than, and I am so much worse than. So that, and I operate from that view that everyone hates me, nobody likes me, I'm not enough, I'm a loser and I suck. And I begin to act from that place. And that's that selfishness. And you see what happens is when my thoughts and my emotions are centered upon me and my actions are coming from this place of me, I hurt others and they retaliate. And all I see is their retaliation. I don't see that I step first. And that selfishness and self-centeredness, that fuels my resentments, that fuels my fears, that fuels my relationship, my sex conduct. It fuels my guilt. It fuels my shame, my 100 forms of fear, my self-delusion, my self-pity, and my self-seeking. And you see, that is what is blocking me from this power. You see, I talk about a sense of separateness from God. That power is always there, and it was always there. But the problem is that I am blocked. And when I see that if I remain blocked, I will relapse. I will drink again. I will use again. I've got to get unblocked. I see that the solution to my conscious sense of separateness is conscious contact. I see that the solution to the root, which is the spiritual malady, is a spiritual awakening. I need that, and I need to get it, and that's what I'm after. Now, if you're bouncing around with me, let's pop over to page 13. We're going to talk in Bill's story, and I know I'm like we're in plants. So on page 13, what we're going to see is Bill Wilson take the actions that later became the 12 steps. You see, on page 13, second full paragraph, it says, "There I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost." And that is his third step. And you can use that as a third step prayer if you're looking for one. I love my sneaky prayers. He's willing to do whatever it takes to get unblocked from this power. That's what the decision is. And it says, I ruthlessly face my sins. Another way to say sin, because that word carries a lot of baggage. And actually, one of the definitions of that word comes from archery, and it's simply to miss the mark. That's what it means. But throw out that word, you don't want it. We're talking about the defects. We're talking about the shortcomings, which are the same thing. We're talking about the manifestations of my selfishness and self-centeredness that are blocking me from this power. So I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound capital F friend. That is God, higher power, the creator, the spirit of the universe, the power that I need. Take them away, root and branch. I've not had a drink since. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to inventory. And he goes on to explain, like my schoolmate, his friend, Abby Thatcher, visited me and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to inventory and I'm going to begin to see clearly the things inside of me that are blocking me from this power. I'm going to see what those roots are. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to see them. And when I share them with God and another human being in step 5, what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin to really get a laser beam focus on what is blocking me. In 6 and 7, I become willing and I ask for these things to be removed, root and branch, taken from me in their totality. And here's my experience. That also begins to truly happen as I go out and I make amends for the harms that I caused as I am blocked. As I am blocked. And I go and I continue that process to weed the spiritual garden that is my soul, because wouldn't you know it, new selfishness, new self-centeredness, it will pop up. And the 10th step and the 11th step give me the tools and the ability to allow the garden to be weeded. I shouldn't say I weed the garden. I let that power take from me root and branch in its totality. And then what happens? what happens is I begin to awaken because I have cleared away the stuff between me and this power. Now we're on page 13, so I might as well pop us over to the bottom of page 11, top of page 12. And Bill Wilson is talking about his friend. His friend is Ebby Thatcher. And he says, I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on different footing. His roots grasped new soil. And so the roots of who I am, the depth of who I am, needs to be rooted and grounded in something new. And what that needs to be is this power, this experience, the ground of my existence, the ground of my being. Needs to be this connection with this power. I'm not saying what yours has to be. I'm just telling you what this little crackhead needs. That's what I need. And you see, oftentimes we talk about that foundation as steps 1, 2, 3. My foundation cannot be steps 1, 2, 3. Because there is no foundation in step 1, I'm going to relapse. There is no foundation and there is a solution, but I don't have it. And there is no foundation, and I am willing to take the action to get me to the solution. The foundation I need is the solution. My foundation must be all 12 steps. That's what I need. And so I need to clear that away. And bear with me. I'm bouncing us around. I'm sure nobody is shocked by this. So if we pop over to page 64, this is what I'm talking about. Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. So what is fueling my resentment is that conscious sense of separateness from God. And if I got it, and I'll have other stems. Resentment isn't my only stem on my spiritual plant. You know what I mean? I got other stems on this bad boy. I got fear stems. I got shame stems. I got guilt stems. I got all these stems. But man, that resentment, it leaves, man. Like it leaps right out. And from it stems all forms of spiritual disease. For we have been not only mentally and physically ill. When we talk about being mentally ill, what we are singularly talking about is the obsession of the mind. The thought that I have when I am sober that takes me back to the first drink, whatever it is. When we talk about being physically ill, what we're talking about specifically is the allergy of the body. That once I start, I cannot stop. So it's not just those things. We've been spiritually sick. And it says, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. That is the order. I treat that hole in my soul. I rip, or really let God to rip away the things that are blocking me from this power. And as a result, that hole in the depth of my soul, that yearning for ease and comfort, it is filled with a connection to this power. And when it is filled, the obsession is gone. I don't want to take a drink. I don't want to smoke crack. I don't want to numb how I feel. I am okay in the here and now. And when I live in those step 10 promises, that position of neutrality, I don't pick up. And as a result, I don't set off the allergy. And that's what we're doing here. And so that is the point. Now, a lot of times what happens is in this book, it talks about how this idea of a power that is greater than myself. It's often described as light. Do you know what I mean? I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. We stood at the sunlight at last. The sunlight of the Spirit, this idea of God, higher power, creator, Spirit as light. And how beautiful that is. How often have we heard that I grow at the pace of pain? And that's true. But what happens is if I take this course of action rigorously, like my life depends on it because it does, I can awaken like a king protea in the sun. That's the national plant of South Africa. That's what that was. if you didn't know, I think I'm clever, but I open like a king protea in the sun, reaching for this power. You know what I'm saying? Like I get to reach for it. So I don't have to be driven by pain. I get to be driven by a yearning, a desire to seek, to know, to experience more. Now, here's the thing. One of the most sure signs of a spiritual experience, of a spiritual awakening, is the desire to go help another human being. Which isn't to say if you don't feel like sponsoring others, don't do it. Go do it till you want to do it. But here's the thing. It talks about a whole bunch of places. On page XXIII, it's in the 4th to the 3rd edition. It says, where the AA seed has been planted, so the CAC it has been planted, it has grown slowly, but at first, but then growing by leaps and bounds when literature has become available. And then also on page 117, it talks about how growth has, the seed has been planted and growth has only begun. The seed has started to sprout in new soil. And on page 113, it talks about how the seed has been planted in his mind. And you see, what is my job as a recovered addict, as a recovered member of Cocaine Anonymous? Like, I'll be honest, I wanna go out there and I wanna fix, manage, save, cure. You know what I mean? I wanna do all that. But my job is simply to plant the seeds. And what is the seed that I am planting? Well, the seed that I am planting is the knowledge of, from my experience, of what it is like to have the allergy, what it is like to have the obsession. To plant the seed of, from my experience, of what it is like to experience our solution, which is the spiritual awakening. And from my experience, how we get there, which are the 12 steps as outlined in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and my experience with those. And my job, I can't, the interesting thing about a seed is that a seed in and of itself is self-sufficient. It has everything that it needs to grow as long as it's planted in fertile soil. And you can take old seeds and you can plant them and they will grow. See, my job is simply to plant the seeds. I can't control the soil. The soil is that willingness that happens when I have had my butt kicked by the illness that is addiction. In the 9th tradition out of the 12 and 12, it talks about great love and great suffering are our only disciplinarians. We need no others. Addiction has a job, and the responsibility of addiction is to beat me into a state of willingness where I'm able to see the truth about who I am and the truth about my predicament. And that means my job is great love. To show up with great love, to share with you what I have found, to try to plant that seed. And when we plant a seed, and if it's in good soil, it'll start to grow. But an interesting thing is that a seed's early growth, it doesn't start with shoots that come up out of the soil. It has to grow roots. And so it's a reminder that as I'm working with others, as I'm trying to carry the message, just because I don't see the immediate results of my work, and it's really God's work, but the immediate results of the work of working with others, that does not mean that I haven't been successful. There might be growth that is happening under the surface that I don't see. And what I've learned living this way of life is that the results of my actions are none of my business. They're God's business. And my job is to show up and to share with you how I have experienced, that spiritual botany, how I've experienced, what has been my root. And how I had those root and branch taken from me. And how I began to be replanted in new soil and fed and led and growing to something new. And what I want to say today is if you have not had this experience, whether you are new, whether you're relapsing, whether you're coming back, whether you've been around a while and maybe it feels like, you're just like a little dandelion in concrete or whatever. What I want you to know is that it does not take long to get well. It does not take long to recover. It does not take long to have this experience. And our very lives depend on helping you. So please, let us help you. Thank you for the opportunity to share.